Okay, here we go. So yeah, as Sarah says, I am currently doing some research. I'm a PhD student. I'm just coming to the end of my first year of 3 of PhD, and it's about pelvic girdle pain research, and more specifically, it's about how we can get people involved in pelvic girdle pain research. So officially, it's improving recruitment and retention in studies investigating pregnancy-related pelvic girdle pain. And I'm just going to talk to you briefly about what that means, why I think it's important, and where I'm at so far. So first, I want to talk quickly about why is research important. And Sarah, just to sort of dovetail on what you were saying, one of the main reasons that research is really important is it makes more treatment options available, accessible to people, and recommended on the NHS. And the NHS doesn't recommend certain treatments for a myriad of reasons, but a large reason often is there isn't enough research to back up that that therapy works. Even though we know it works, everyone who does it knows it works. Unless there are enough formal research studies done on it, it won't get recommended. And the other reasons that research are done are to understand the condition more. And, there is still no agreement about exactly what causes pelvic girdle pain or the mechanisms underneath it. And it's hard to recommend really effective treatments if you don't still completely understand the condition itself. And then there's a kind of another area of research which is to do with understanding people's experiences of having pelvic girdle pain. What actually matters to them, what impact does it have on your life? And that's kind of the other side of the coin to treatment, because sometimes it's all very well saying, do this and that will be treated, but actually if that's not a suitable treatment for somebody because actually it doesn't work in their lives, then that's not a good treatment. So research is really important, and together all of this research forms an evidence base, and we really need that evidence base to be able to make any actual policy changes or NHS changes going forwards. And the more research we have, the more information we have, the better care we have. I mean, I think the goal of all health research should be to give supportive, respectful, accessible, particularly accessible care that really understands the lived experiences of people with pelvic pain. And so to me, that is why research is so important. I am biased, I'm a researcher, but that's why it's really important. But there are challenges. People, particularly in pregnancy and particularly in pain in pregnancy, are understandably reluctant to get involved in research studies during pregnancy. And it's completely understandable. I mean, I'm sure everyone in this meeting can immediately think of a reason why they wouldn't want to do that. And so my project, if I just move on to my next slide, is what I'm trying to do is kind of this push-pull street. I want to really understand what we in research call the barriers and facilitators. So the things that are stopping people from taking part, the things that might encourage people to take part around recruitment and retention. So recruitment is that first moment where we meet somebody or we reach out to somebody and say, hey, this research study might be great for you. Are you interested? And they say, yes, please. And then retention is staying involved in the study to the end. And so I want to understand how we as researchers can design research in a way that actually accommodates the needs of the people that use it. And that might be practical things like, I'll come on to some things later, but flexible appointments or childcare, all that might be more trust building, reassurance, education. So I'm trying to explore, what is it, where is this disconnect, and what can we do to solve that disconnect? Because I think we all want a better outcome for people with pelvic girdle pain, and for that we do need research. So my project is in 4 parts. First, I did what's called a systematic review, and that is basically a fancy way of saying that I looked at all the research studies about pelvic girdle pain that have happened so far, and I tried to understand how were they recruiting, were they successful in their recruitment, did people stay in the study to the end, did they have any challenges, just to really understand what's the landscape like at the moment, and where do we, as a starting point for my project. The next part I'm moving on to is what's called qualitative interviews, and I start these in the autumn, and I'm very excited. This is my favorite part of research, and this is talking to real people. So it's talking to people about their experiences and understanding from real people with pelvic girdle pain what's going on. What are your thoughts on research? What is your understanding? What would you need? What would make you feel more comfortable? And trying to just really in an in-depth way get to the bottom of those questions and listen, really listen. The third part of my project is a national survey, and that is just to give it's similar to the one-on-one interviews that I'll be doing, but in a much broader reach. Again, just building that evidence base, gathering more information, validating the information I've already gathered, and just giving us a really strong point to come to my fourth stage, which is building a list of recommendations. So this is what I'm calling participant-informed recommendations. So recommendations that have come from people with lived experience of pelvic girdle pain, of what they would want when looking for future researchers, when they are designing these things, when they're designing research studies. How can we do this in a way that meets your needs? So I have done the systematic review. I'll very quickly, just out of interest, give you some of the results of that. So at the moment, most of this big pie chart here, most research papers, about a third, are recruiting using clinician referrals. So that's when, for example, a midwife might know about the study. She sees a woman with pelvic girdle pain in her clinic, and she says, hey, there's a study going on that you might be interested in. And about a third recruit from patient lists or specialist clinics. So this might be a researcher going to a physiotherapist that specializes in pelvic girdle pain and saying, we're doing this study, your patients might be interested. And to give you some idea of where we are at, or where these studies are at in terms of achieving their recruitment targets. Now, it sounds a bit cold to get down to sort of like, we need a certain amount of people for this. But the truth is, for a research study to work effectively, we do need a certain amount of people to be in it. If it is too small, we can't be sure that the results found in that study aren't just due to chance. And then you've sort of put everybody through a research study to not really get meaningful results at the end. And so this is calculated, I will not go into the statistics of it, but it's calculated by very clever research statisticians. You need a certain set number to be in your study. And just over half of all the research studies that I looked at achieved that target. So that's pretty low. It is in line with other clinical research of its kind. Recruitment and retention are sort of global problems. But it's low, and if we want things to change, we need it to be higher. It's a bit more encouraging. Nearly 70% achieved above or equal to 90% of their recruitment target. But again, there is room to improve there if we want to make a difference. So just moving on to some of the things that came out of, again, just looking at those previous studies. Some things are barriers, clinical changes. This is sort of where often not related to a change in the pelvic girdle pain, but for example, a woman goes into labor early and has to leave the study, or has another medical related condition, which means she can no longer participate. Participant preferences, often if you're offering one treatment or another in a study, and some people really want one and they really don't want another, they might not want to continue if they're given the other one. And some facilitators, which I'm sure will seem really obvious to everyone on this call, but things like offering childcare, giving flexible appointments, and lowering participant burden. And that's sort of just a researcher speak for asking as little as we can of the people that take part in our studies. People are busy, people have a lot of other commitments, and people are in pain. We need to be really mindful and respect their time. So the other thing I have done so far is what, again, in research we call PPIE, which is patient and public involvement and engagement. And basically that's like a sort of mini version of what I'll be doing next in terms of the interviews. So it's talking to people who have had pelvic girdle pain, have pelvic girdle pain, researchers involved in pelvic girdle pain research and clinicians, and just asking some of those questions initially. And there's been some really interesting things that have come out of that so far. And I think for me, the most important is the concept of trust. And I think all of us, having had, being a woman and being in pain, have felt at best dismissed or not listened to, or had our pain disregarded, or, and there is this thing about trust. People are rightly wary having had these experiences. And so I think that is the foundation of everything. And understanding and actually listening meaningfully to people about their experiences, and not just dismissing their concerns or not dismissing their lived experiences of, I think we all know here how hard things can actually be with pelvic pain and how long it can last afterwards. Sarah, and I'm sorry, Fiona, your children are grown up now, and you're still here. It has such a long-lasting impact. And I think that sometimes we're very quick to say, it'll be fine, you'll have a baby and it'll be fine. And so listening meaningfully, understanding the real experiences, and then communication and education. And I think this comes as part of this building trust, in that, we need to really, it is very understandable why people don't want to be involved in a research study at that sort of time in their lives. And part of building that trust is explaining why it's so important, and just raising awareness about pelvic girdle pain and raising awareness about the need for research. So this is kind of two-way street. And practical considerations come up all the time. People are juggling young children, they're juggling being pregnant, being in pain, work, other things. We really need to be thinking much more radically than I think we have been in the past, traditionally, about how we deliver and how we design research studies. And there is, that is starting, you're starting to see it since COVID, when everything had to go digital, and you're seeing some big strides in progress, but I think it really needs to be tailored to actually what women need. And so just to finish up, next steps, as I said, so my next stage is the interviews, which start in October. And Sarah and Vicky and Jen, when we first started talking, have very kindly said that this is an opportunity that I'm going to advertise through the Pelvic Partnership. If anybody, for people in your Facebook group, would like to be involved in my study and would like to have their voices heard on this, I will be sending out information on that later. And yeah, at this stage, I'm just really looking to listen and to understand and to work together to find ways that we can make research much more accessible to those who will be using it and those who in the future will then benefit from it.